Hi, my name's Claire and this is my travel channel, Claire's Footsteps. I have taken different types of transport all over the world and it's what I really like to focus on in my travels. So today I thought I would create a video about how to get around England with some tips about different types of transport and how you can save money when travelling around the country. This video is focused on England. That's because I come from England, I've lived in a few different places around England and I know the country very well. You could probably also apply a lot of the tips to Wales and Scotland, but because I don't know Wales and Scotland that well, I'm not speaking on behalf of that. But if you're travelling around the UK generally, you'll probably find that most of these tips work. So what I'm going to do is break down the 4 most common modes of transport. And they are hiring a car and self-driving, trains, buses as in long distance coaches and also city buses, and flying. And I'm going to look at how you can use all of these modes of transport to get around the UK. So first let's look at driving, whether that be driving your own car or hiring a car and driving it around. So I'm not going to go into the general main perks of driving because I'm sure you know what they are, but I will mention a few particular things about driving in England specifically. So even though we are a small country, a lot of places aren't that well connected with public transport. So I live in a town called Exmouth in Devon, and we do have a station which connects to the nearest city, Exeter, about every half an hour. And from there I can take trains to other places around the country. However, a lot of places nearby don't have train stations, they just have bus routes, and these bus routes might only run once an hour, maybe once every 2 hours, and sometimes on a Sunday or a bank holiday they don't run at all. These places are all like in the East Devon region, which is just east of Exmouth, but there are lots of other pockets of places like this throughout the country. And a lot of the times these will be places that are really nature focused, you know, maybe really nice beachy places or maybe like national parks. So if you want to travel around any of these places, and you really should, they're like some of the most beautiful areas of the UK, you probably will need a car, especially if you're travelling between a few of them. The public transport routes just aren't really feasible. But what about the cons of using a car? So another thing that you might not realise just by looking at a map of the UK is that our driving times can be long. I know we're a small country, and I know if you're watching this and you're from the US, Canada, Australia, you might be like, oh, a 4-hour drive is nothing. And trust me, I spent a whole year driving around Australia, so I do get it. But, so say a 4-hour drive would be from where I live in Devon to Birmingham's probably less than that. So Birmingham's probably about a 3-hour drive, but there is a high chance that I can get stuck in quite a lot of traffic. Our traffic is no joke. There have been so many times when I have just been sitting in standstill traffic on the motorway. Often it happens in rush hour, so either when people are going to work or coming home from work, but also it can happen at any time of day as well. So I would always factor that in when you're renting a car in the UK. Like, our traffic can be awful. We're a very densely populated country, which can lead to that. So even though the distances might look short on a map, time-wise and stress-wise, they may be higher. Another thing to factor in is cost. The UK is progressively getting more expensive, unfortunately, to live and travel in, which means that car hire prices are going up, and petrol prices aren't as high as they were this time a year ago, but they're fairly high in the grand scheme of things. So those are the things you've got to think about when you are hiring a car. So let's move on to public transport. So the next one is trains. Now, if trains were affordable and they went everywhere I wanted them to go, to be honest, I would just get them all the time. I get trains all over the world. I've got trains in China, Kazakhstan, Indonesia, even Mexico. Went on the Copper Canyon train in Mexico. So yeah, honestly, love a good train. Our trains in the UK are quite mixed in quality. Some are very modern and quite nice, like the GWR trains from Exeter to London Paddington are always quite nice and shiny. But we have some, which I won't name any names, Southeastern, who always have rather dated trains. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes you'll get something nice, and even in standard seats you'll get good leg room. But on others, they can be a bit dated, and they can get very crowded as well. So I would always advise to book your seat in advance. Although sometimes I have booked a seat in advance before and they've changed the train last minute and I've still not had a seat, which can be quite frustrating. The main drawback of getting trains is they are very expensive. There are a few ways that you can make them cheaper. I'd always recommend buying your ticket in advance. If you can get an advance ticket, it usually works out cheaper than like an anytime day return. If you are a UK resident, then you can get a rail card. I'm pretty sure you have to be a UK resident to get it. Check out the link that I'll put in the description below to go onto the railcard website. You can also use Trainline. They have a split save feature. So what they do is you put in your starting and your ending destination, and sometimes you'll get like more than one ticket. So for example, recently I travelled from London to Leeds on the train, and I had a ticket from London to Stevenage and then from Stevenage to Leeds. So I had two separate tickets for the same train, but I was booked onto the same seat the whole time, so I stayed in the same seat the whole time. So it's all completely above board, and you don't have to do anything. You just have to make sure you're showing the right ticket for that part of the journey. So that's a really good way to save some money, and Trainline have actually embedded that into their booking platform now, so that's a good one to check out, definitely. Obviously the trains are much more environmentally friendly, which is why I often do go with them, and I often use those little techniques to try and get some money off because they can be quite expensive. But another thing to consider is train strikes, which have been happening more frequently recently in the last like 12 months. There's been an ongoing dispute between the rail companies and the government about rates of pay, and they do strike quite a lot, at least once a month, sometimes even more. So that's another thing to consider. However, if you do have a rail ticket and they announce that they're striking on the day that you're meant to travel, you will get a refund. Oh, another good thing to mention that a lot of people don't know, or at least don't act on, is if your train in England is half an hour late or more, or in some companies even 15 minutes late or more, you can get like a 50% to 100% refund. So it's called delay repay. So if you're ever on a train that is more than half an hour late, definitely look up delay repay for your train company, and you'll be able to claim some money back. They'll send it back into your bank account. I've done this quite a few times and it works quite well. That's definitely something to remember because I don't think that's that common. Another thing to consider with trains, which I mentioned in the car section, is that not everywhere has a railway station. And even places that do, sometimes there's not the right line that goes there, so it requires a lot of connections. For example, a few months ago I went to Looe in Cornwall, and I looked at getting the train there from Exmouth. It's not that far on the map. I think it was about an hour and 10 minutes drive or so. And the train would have taken me like nearly 3 hours because I had to go from Exmouth to Exeter, change, Exeter to Liskeard, change, Liskeard to Looe. So when you have that many changes, and especially if there's time in each of the, you have change time in each of the places, then it can end up being quite a long, and also a lot of places don't have railway stations, so you can't get the train everywhere in the UK. Next up, let's talk about buses. So I'm going to separate this into two sections. The first one I'm going to talk about is coaches, which are things like National Express, Flixbus, Megabus. And then I'll talk about regional buses. So coaches are a good way to get around. When I was a student, I pretty much solely used coaches to travel from Bristol, where I was a student, to London, where my family lived. They can be very cheap. When I was a student, they were like, I got buses for like £1 sometimes, but they're not usually that cheap anymore. But you can still get them for like £10 to £15. So they are a lot cheaper than getting the train, especially if you don't qualify for a rail card. Again, I would always recommend booking them ahead of time to get the best rates. The main drawback of getting coaches is that obviously, like cars, they can be caught in traffic. They also go quite a lot slower than cars. They can go 60 miles an hour on the motorway or less. just because they're bigger vehicles and they can't overtake as much. And they do tend to go, like, serve a few different cities, so that always adds on to the time. So for example, if I got a coach from Exeter to London, it would always stop at Heathrow Airport, which just obviously adds on time to the journey. However, coaches, you are always guaranteed a seat. The legroom is always decent and there is always somewhere to charge. So if you don't mind being on a coach for that long, then they're fairly pleasant. They also run quite late at night. So I recently got a 10:30 p.m. coach from London that got me back into Exeter at like 3 in the morning, and obviously that meant I still got home very late, but it did mean I got home that night. So sometimes I do quite like using them because, yeah, they do run later than trains and they can help you get to places at different times when the trains might not be running. Public buses are usually an option to get around local places. So for example, if I wanted to get from Exmouth to Exeter, there's a public bus that serves it and it stops at quite a few places en route, so it might make more sense for me to use that bus than use the train, which the stations might be a bit further. So there's a lot of public buses in the UK, and most towns and villages that don't have a train station are served by a public bus. But often these public buses don't come very regularly. They may only come once an hour, once every 2 hours, some even less depending on the place. At the moment, most public buses in the UK are only £2 for a single journey. So the government introduced this price cap, I think it's until October now, they extended it recently. And it does mean that any kind of single journey that you take, it will only be £2, which is often cheaper than a return these days. So that is a good way to save money if there is a public bus that will get you from A to B. But usually you'll only use these for shorter journeys. The last mode of transport I'm going to talk about in this video is flying. So you can take internal flights in England and like the rest of the UK. I personally have never taken an internal like domestic flight in England. I've actually very rarely taken domestic flights anywhere in the world. A lot of that is to do with the fact that I don't like flying, but I've also never really had a reason to take a domestic flight in the UK. People take them, you know, if you're going from the very south of the UK, like London or Newquay or Bristol, then you may well take a flight up to Scotland or even some of the northern cities. But you've also got to factor in time it takes to get to the airport, time you have to spend at the airport, time it takes to get from the airport, and obviously all of that has to be factored into your cost as well. So you may well find it easier, quicker, and around the same price to get a train. Personally, yeah, I don't really see flying as a very practical way to get around the UK, unless you really are doing one of those flights where you're going from London to Aberdeen or something like that, and you need to be there quickly. In that case, it may be the best option. But generally, I wouldn't recommend flying to tourists visiting the UK. We are a small country, you don't really need to fly, and as you've seen in this video, we do have some other transport options available. For locals, it's not very common to fly from A to B. We're much more likely to either get the train or drive ourselves. So I hope this video has proved useful. If you have any questions about getting around the UK or even anything about visiting the UK, I've lived here for all my life, so feel free to drop me a comment. And do drop me a comment and let me know what your preferred method of transport is. If, say, money was no object, what transport would you choose? For me, it's always trains. I really enjoy a train journey. I've got loads of train videos from all over the world if you want to check those out, including one where I took the sleeper train from London to Cornwall. So thank you so much for watching. I should have some more train videos coming up in the next couple of months, so do stay tuned for those. If you'd like to see more videos, do hit subscribe, and please give this video a big like if you've enjoyed it. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!